Okay, so now that we have cleared the sequence that was already there, we can start inputting our own. And there's a few different ways that we can do that. So again, we're still in the middle mode there, sequencer, and this first button that says note, if I push that, so it's illuminated. So now we can write up to 16 notes in our sequence. And there's a couple of different ways that we can enter in our own pattern. So for instance, the first thing that we can do is we turn on which notes we would like to appear. So if, for instance, I turned on every note, all 16, we'll get 16 individual C4s, which is not very interesting. But we can change the notes in a couple of different ways. So say if I wanted the pattern to appear on each note, and we've turned them all on here, I can change the note by holding down the step and pushing the keyboard. So for instance, on that first one, if I push the low C, changes that note to a C3. Up here, I could change this to be D4, and we could just put in a few random ones. See what that sounds like. Or if you don't happen to have a MIDI keyboard connected, so we're using the K25 at the moment, but you can actually enter notes without using a MIDI keyboard. The way to do that is you hold down the step that you want to edit the note and turn the value dial. So this is set on A sharp at the moment, but we can change it to be whatever we like. So I could do the same note an octave up. Lastly, if you are feeling brave, you can actually play in the notes in real time. This was a feature that was added in version 1.10, but if you hold the performance button and press the play button, we'll get a metronome and you'll be in what we call a real-time record mode, where it'll record the notes that you're playing. So I'll show you what that sounds like. And if you were to play notes on top of that, it would record them into the sequencer. Okay, so now we've got our sequence down, we can look at how we can edit it a little bit. So the next option that we have after we've entered our notes is we can choose the gate length for each of the steps. And this is how long each steps last for, whether it's quite a short note or whether it's a long one. So if I flip over to my next option that says gate, now for each of the notes, we've got a note on each 16 steps. If I hold down one of the notes, so the first one, on the screen, you can see it displays the number 50, and that's saying how long this note is particularly at the moment. So you can go anywhere from 1 all the way up to 100, or you can choose it to tie to the next one. So at the moment, because we've not changed any of them, all the notes are defaulting to being a gate length of 50, which when I play the sequence, you'll hear all the notes don't join onto each other. There's a little short gap between each one. But we can change that. So for instance, our first note, I can increase the length of that so that it ties onto the next one. And if I change the value of note 2 to be 100, so now when we play the sequence, we should get one long held note, well, a longer note at least, before it moves on to the next one. So you can hear that first note is tied together, so it has a longer note in the sequence. Similarly, for any other ones, if we wanted to make the sounds a little bit shorter, so perhaps some of these later notes, I might want to make them sort of very short. So let's take those down to about 10. Let's do a third one. And maybe let's put another one up to a higher value in between. Let's see what that sounds like. So you can hear we're going from our tied note, we have one that is quite long in the middle and then a couple of really short stabby notes towards the end. And of course, if we wanted to change any part of the sequence to sort of accent those kind of things, we can turn different notes off. So if I went back to note, where we've still got our 16 notes going on, if I wanted to, I could turn off certain notes and it won't play them. So these ones where the buttons are now not illuminated, it won't play those. So you can turn those off in the middle of a performance if you wanted to sort of change a few different accents. But it's quite cool, it's quite creative. So we'll move on now and we'll look at the next option, which is glide. So I'm just going to re-add in those notes. So when we go over to glide, this is which notes, how the notes sort of glide between each other. So sometimes it could be called portamento. So it's notes that are held and if they glide between each other. And I can choose where I might want glide to appear, and then I have a value for how much it'll glide on the left-hand side here. So if we turn that up a little bit, and we'll just choose a few notes at random and see what that sounds like. This is in the glide option. So you can hear there between the notes, it's gliding between them. This is the amount of glide time. So if it's going if we have it at a low value, it'll glide quite quickly. Or if we have it at a high value, it'll really take a while to glide between them. And you can use that to sort of create some nice little slides between notes. So the next option along is parameter. So this allows us to make some changes to the sound in real time in the sequence. So if I flip over to PRM, which is parameter, so now we can save one parameter automation per step. So you can only save one per step, but you can change a few things around. It's quite creative. So on the first step, I can hold down the first one and change the cutoff dial. So I could set this to be 255. So that means on this particular step, it'll make sure that the cutoff is set all the way open to 255. But then perhaps later on, I want to tweak it down to a much lower value. So I could take it anywhere between 0 and 255. So we'll go for quite a low value of about 30. And now when we play the sequence, the first few notes will be quite bright because the cutoff is open. But then once it reaches this point, it'll drop off again. So any of the controls on the front panel can actually be recorded as parameter automation. So even the level of oscillators. So we could do the noise oscillator. So for instance, at this portion of the sequence, we might want to bring it. So for steps 3, 4, and 5, where we bring in a noise oscillator. So if I hold step 3 and tweak the level of that up to a maximum, and then on 5, tweak it back down to 0. So now when we play the pattern, so not only when we reach step 1 is it going to open the cutoff, but on step 3 to 5, it's going to bring up the level of the noise oscillator and then drop it back down. So that's quite cool. So on each step, you can have one parameter automation, and this can be really cool for making interesting patterns. And then the last option that we have is a performance mode. So this is all the different parameters that you can choose to affect the performance in real time. So you can see there's a little arrow that's taking me underneath here. And this means we can edit any of these particular parameters. So for starters, you can see number 16 is flashing, and that's our tempo. So I'll play the pattern in a second now, and I'll adjust the value dial, which you can change the tempo so we can slow it and speed it down. You can adjust that to taste, but we can also do a couple of other different things. So we can change the scaling. So at the moment, you can see this, the first light is illuminated there, which indicates that we're in 16th mode. But say, for instance, I might want it in quarter notes. So I could click on that one. And it assigns a quarter note value to each note. We can also add an amount of shuffle if we wanted to add a bit of groove. We can also change the direction of the pattern. So at the moment, it's just going forward. But for instance, maybe we want to go in either backwards or say this third option, which is forwards and then backwards. Which can be quite cool. Or even just random, where it'll just pick notes at random and play them in a specific order. So we can also change the first and last step. So for instance, you might not even want it to be a 16-note sequence, but if you wanted to, you can short it down to even 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 notes and keep it a bit creative.